Hi, everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Kelly Kivland. I'm a curator at Dia. And it's, as I mentioned, a real pleasure to be in conversation tonight with Basel and Ruanne. And we're really looking forward to having a conversation around the first part of their digital commission with Dia, titled Postscript, After Everything is Extracted. I do want to thank all of those that have been involved with organizing tonight's event, which include Theodora Lang, Claudia Schaefer-Trabeau, Andrea Villa, Max Tanone, especially Max, given he just had to help me right now, for their assistance. And our conversation aligns this evening with the 25th anniversary of Dia's Artist Web projects, which also have been undergoing a large restoration initiative this year due to all of our Flash projects. So we're really excited to be launching this 40th project with Basel and Ruanne, which is a co-commission between Dia and the Museum of Modern Art. Over the next year, really from now through the year and even probably longer, this project will unfold as both a digital and physical iteration. The virtual chapters will be unfolding with Dia, and then there'll be a forthcoming exhibition at MoMA, which will be curated by Martha Joseph. And the project with Dia is made possible with support from the Khalid Showman Foundation, Darat Al-Funun, and the New York State Council of the Arts. And the artists also received support from TBA 21. Over the last 4 years, there have been several colleagues that I would be remiss in mentioning that have been integral to realizing this work, including Patricia Hernandez, Kirsten May Reed-Gill, Valerie Amend, Max Tanone, and Sarah Tucker. And while over the last 4 years we've been working on this project, Basel and Ruanne have been working on this project for nearly a decade. And the greater project very much revolves around collected recordings that the artists have been gathering since the early 2010s from YouTube and other social media sites and sources of people singing and dancing in communal spaces in Iraq, Palestine, and Syria. The second part of the digital commission, which will launch in the summer of 2021, will include this greater and more extensive collection of found online recordings, and it will also be brought together with new recorded content that the artists have conceived with a dancer, a group of electronic musicians in Ramallah, Palestine. But the first part of the digital commission, which is again titled Postscript, After Everything is Extracted, launched last week. And tonight we're going to give focus to Postscript, which is a reflection on the constant state of mourning currently experienced across physical and virtual space, and has been developed by the artists over the last several months. Hello, Basel and Ruanne. Thank you. Thank you for your patience as well. Thank you for joining us tonight from Brooklyn, and thank you for the wonderful project.
Thank you.
I thought we could begin by speaking more broadly about your practice, which spans, of course, sound, text, image, installation, and performance. Your greater practice is really realized as a multimedia installations. I think here comes the presentation. And it's engaged with highlighting often counter narratives rather than upend strategies of erasure that are really particular to colonialist strategies. And I thought we would begin once we take a look at the PowerPoint by talking about incidental insurgents, which you started in 2012 and exists in 3 parts. And it also unfolds with several chapters. And I thought it would be interesting for us to begin the conversation there, just because it very much aligns in approach with how you're conceiving of the process around amnesia. So if you wouldn't mind sharing more with us around incidental insurgents and the process you undertook in that sort of long development alongside amnesia.
I think, yeah, there we go. Sorry. Do you want to start? I'm trying to, I want to be brief about the incidental insurgents. It was a project that we started in 2012 during the time of the revolutions across the Arab world. And it was a 3-part project that essentially was a search for a different political imaginary or language that took the figure of the bandit as a sort of avatar, to think about how this sort of impulse for a radically different way of being and existing in the world was something that kept showing up in different times and places and had this kind of incredible resonance. And what we wanted to think about was not seeing the history of revolutions that were sort of incomplete as a sort of failed history. So to think more about how there was this impulse that kept returning in different shapes and forms and could not be killed in a way. And so the whole project is this like convoluted search that uses the writings of Victor Serge, who was an anarchist, and Roberto Bolaño, who was also a sort of kind of artist as bandit. So there is this figure of the bandit as this political figure that's also a criminal figure. So it's in this kind of gray zone that really frames the project, right? I don't know. It's so hard to sort of condense the whole project.
Yeah, I mean, I think also the fact that that project started around a similar time that we began actually collecting the material for May Amnesia. So not to kind of skip to that right away, but so I feel that there is a connection in the sense that it's just a kind of this. Obviously, when we were collecting material for May Amnesia, we didn't know we were making work, but it was in that same moment where there was a sort of radical potential, and we felt connected or invested in that radical potential, and incidental insurgents was one of the ways that we. Yeah, it was one of the ways that we started to look at this moment as a sort of potential to radically kind of reimagine the way, like language, political language, but also our practice in a way sort of started taking a different turn in terms of how the long research and can also be kind of return and come back into the work in different forms, and how projects could take on multiple forms in parts and appear in parts, etc. So I feel that's just wanted to sort of add that.
There's a lot more, but I don't know.
Well, maybe we can move, just because we got started a little bit late, yes, to Only the Beloved Keeps Our Secrets, which is a more recent project from 2016. And within this project, you're utilizing some excerpts from the scripts that you've gathered from this collected archive. That's a part of May Amnesia. It also includes the surveillance footage of a young 14-year-old boy who is crossing the fence in Hebron. Is that correct? And this video, or rather this film, is being screened right now on Dia's website for those that want to watch it. There's also the installation version here. But I thought it would be nice for us to talk about work and the excerpts from the collected archive. You yourself have even said that this is more or less a prelude to the larger project of May Amnesia. And I'm wondering if you can maybe speak to the elements of erasure and testimony that feel very much part of Only the Beloved.
You want to start, maybe?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start. Yeah, I think in a way I would have to really speak about May Amnesia to answer that question, because we...
Sure, that's fine too.
We began collecting material in 2010 when the revolution was happening in Egypt. And part of the impulse for that was the feeling that And the material we were collecting was mostly from the protests that were happening. We were spending all our time online, and that was the way that we were actually experiencing the revolution, being in Palestine and being unable to actually move to a lot of these places. And, you know, as we were experiencing it, we were also experiencing the fact that the feed was constantly moving, right? And material was constantly disappearing. People were also removing videos. Other videos were being removed, but there was also just the natural sort of amnesia quality of the internet, of course, which is just this overload of information. And so we, you know, had this very strong impulse to save the videos, and we started creating, you know, what would later become a kind of archive, although we don't like to think about it as an archive. And so, you know, our thinking around the erasure of this material was not just obviously the virtual ways in which this material is erased, but what is the relationship between this digital kind of virtual space and material lived space, and how is it that things move between these spaces, but also the erasure of material on the internet is also echoing actual physical erasure and violence. So it's really trying to think about these, you know, manifold kind of forms of erasures that happen in these spaces. But at the same time, what always interests us is to start from a place of how are people resisting that, right? So, you know, I think all of our projects are kind of concerned with how people are trying to generate different possibilities. And so the videos of song and dance organically became very important to us. We just started collecting that material.
And much of this material is no longer accessible on any of the platforms that you
some of it is taken down, and some of it you don't know how to get back to it, right? So there isn't always there's not always a route back. But what became very interesting for us is the way in which there was always this feeling of a sort of dispossessed community around the videos. So the way that a kind of virtual community was created, but also at the same time, the videos of people singing and dancing was also about them kind of claiming space and claiming themselves. So it has the physical moment in which that video takes place is also very, very important. It's not just about the sort of virtual way in which it circulates. So I mean, that's sort of to answer the way that we were thinking about erasure and how we then got to the first expression of that in Only the Beloved. And obviously we're also thinking about the erasure of entire living fabrics. So it's not just people, it's things and places and narratives. It's the erasures that are happening in the land. And so the land figures a lot. And obviously, as you said, the story of this young boy who was going to pick this edible plant and then was killed by the Israeli military became a very important part of that specific work. And actually that material was deleted off the internet and doesn't exist anymore, but we have it in the archive.
Oh, wow.
The CCTV footage.
It was made public, and then they had an injunction to remove it off the internet.
Oh, I had no idea. So this is something that, because of downloading, now exists in the archive, but doesn't exist in circulation otherwise. Huh. And that actually is a nice way to sort of lead to the next question I had for you, which Max, if you want to, go to the even the next slide here, where this is from a text that you wrote from the same title of May Amnesia Never Kiss Us in the Mouth. That was published in 2015, I believe, in the Art After the Internet publication from the exhibition at the MC Chicago. And I thought it would be a nice way into talking about Postscript, but also between Only the Beloved and this new work, the greater work of May Amnesia, where you're in this text here, which those can read it that are joining us. It's very much focused on thinking around how the virtual environment can bear witness, ideas around transformation and new ways of being, these potentials that are, even in here, which is kind of funny, I noticed in the form of vines, which really don't exist much anymore. But just how quickly things change, right? I mean, in 5 years, those were very significant then. But more importantly, thinking about the potential of, bearing witness in this virtual environment. And I think I've mentioned this to you both, but it reminds me of a woman named Elisa Richardson, who's recently written a book that thinks about Black witnessing in relationship to mobile and social media, and the dissemination of these videos being a huge part of the greater movement here. And I wanted to ask, not only in the last 5 years, how your ideas have evolved around the potential of the virtual environment, because it was really from this text that led us to really think about this project in the digital realm, but how your time here in the United States has also impacted some of these feelings as well. So it's a twofold question.
I'll answer. Maybe I'll answer the first part. And then, I think it's important actually to also mention something that this project, I think, brings several of our interests in our several things in our practice together in a way that hasn't happened before, especially with the sort of web iteration. And so what comes to mind is, because the two works you mentioned actually kind of predate, come before this work and are connected to it. And one thing I didn't mention was the Guerrilla Open Access Manifesto by Aaron Swartz. And essentially that, that manifesto came out and is calling for the sort of what we understood as the liberation of knowledge, or just sort of, sharing material online. And he basically downloaded the entire JSTOR and put it online for everyone. And then, and then he got taken to court, and eventually he committed suicide. And so he was very much informing that time in our practice and our thinking, our political thinking, and about how the sort of monopoly over knowledge and the control over knowledge and the virtual and the internet was a sort of site where we could actually a very important and critical site for the future of the sharing of knowledge, which was a big aspect of the incidental insurgents. And then I feel when the project started and we were interested in that material, it was precisely because that moment was the activists on the ground were using the sort of the internet as a space to rupture the image of the state. So the moments of insurrection were intrinsically connected to the virtual in that moment, and they were moving in tandem together. And this is essentially what really sort of brought us to sort of think about this in an archival sense, and think about these moments as important documents, and think about the internet as a site of contestation, essentially. And of course, we can see how important this has it's still going on till this day, and it's still a very important site in terms of what happened, in terms of censorship, in terms of social media being censored. I mean, that's still an ongoing battle till this day. So I feel that even though sort of politics political situation changed on the ground, and there was no longer sort of moments of insurrection, and these moments shifted. What remained for us, or what remained, is the sort of these songs and dance and these moments of communal gathering were becoming critical documents for us that and essentially like very critical ways that people were narrating and resisting their erasure, using these moments, but also uploading them, putting them online, and essentially countering their erasure. And what, for us, this is a sort of, the project or the whole project becomes, how do we sort of then take that and propel it and move forward with it and respond to it and make it, project it and make it even more, And so part of the project is to also create a body of knowledge and to take this material as content to study and to think about and to see as testament, essentially. And then how it relates to the U.S. Maybe you can.
No, I mean maybe just.
Sorry.
She was going to ask another question.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to lead off on what you were saying, Basel, in terms of So the last 10 years, you've been collecting this material. You've been working with it intensely over the last 4 or 5 years, organizing all of these videos, creating new videos in Palestine. And I was just considering all of that labor that's being done, all of that collecting, all of that collecting and really building this body of knowledge, as you said. And then you start to write a text. The project, for just full transparency for those that are listening now, is going to launch last spring. You start writing the text in February of 2020. This already is a text that is on mourning, ideas around personal and collective mourning, of space, of bodies, of land, of many things. And then by March, we're in the situation that we all know well, and the desolation that has occurred over the last several months. So maybe moving forward into Postscript, and we can advance in great. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to pause on the greater project, the digital project, and begin at the end, or begin with the Postscript.
As you said, we actually started the text in February, and it was a way for us to reflect on the project. And actually the text was meant to be most likely used for the installation. We weren't sure it was going to even end up online in what has now become part 2 of the web project. And it was really like the text is very much trying to think about what does it mean to be in a constant state of loss. And it's not just our loss, but it's also thinking through issues of land, issues of water, issues of the environment. Because
you went coming closer.
Oh, sorry.
So
Sorry. So it's not just thinking about human loss, but it's thinking about, as you said, all these other forms of loss in relation to the land, to the environment. Because in a sense, that's what the archive is expressing, right? It's expressing disappearing spaces, disappearing communities. It's expressing how people are trying to lay claim again to these kind of disappearing spaces, and so it was a moment of reflection for us on the whole project. And then when the pandemic happened, we had this very intense feeling that somehow Palestine had arrived to the whole world, in a sense. So, the conditions...
What do you mean by that?
In a sense, the conditions that we were thinking about of, being in this sort of state of loss and state of mourning, a state in which you cannot move, right? So what we had been thinking about in the Postscript is how we couldn't these videos, we were collecting them online virtually because we couldn't reach these people, and these people couldn't reach us. We're talking about conditions where physical movement is not always possible, or sometimes dangerous, between spaces. So it was strange because it felt to us that those conditions, which are found in other parts of the world, has suddenly become an even kind of wider condition, really. And it felt to us that we really needed to take pause and to think about it, and to just give space to what was happening, in the sense of just the kind of immense amounts of kind of loss that was taking place, and it would feel, I don't know, it felt to us that already the text and the postscript was speaking to that in this uncanny way, and so we felt that we needed to stay in that, to remain in that, and not to just have this kind of impulse to just move on. We can't move on yet because we're still thinking about and feeling what this all means, and how we can deal with it.
Uncanny. I mean, it was, you're in what your words are becoming an even more heightened reality. What you were experiencing as in Palestine, but also now experiencing here across various pandemics, right? It was COVID, and then immediately we're faced with the greater uprising again of BLM, and that all is a part of this conversation and text that you're writing. And I think it also allowed you space, if I can say, to be in that state of mourning, and to not just be writing the text, but to be within it and these ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's important is that, what we have been thinking about, in relation not only to Palestine, but in relation to a lot of conditions of dispossession, right, that we're experiencing across the world, that are just becoming more and more intense. What Basel and I had been thinking a lot about was, how to think about being in a state of loss, or in this sort of negative state, not as something that sort of just needs kind of repair, but what can happen if we, stay in that kind of moment, and then think about how we can, from within something that is fracture, generate other possibilities. Because in a way, being Palestinian, you have to always constantly shapeshift or like mutate in a way. And we started to think about how that can be something that can sort of be liberating as well. So, the text is thinking about it in different ways.
I think the whole, like the text and the sound and the image as a whole has, because it was created in that moment, also, even though we've been thinking about these ideas, I feel that like we embodied them we embodied them in a very different way, like never before, even because we've had this feeling before. It was in Palestine. It wasn't in New York City, so it made a big difference, I think, to how to sort of being on this like outside. It's kind of almost like you're watching your body being you're kind of outside your body, watching yourself as you. And I think that a lot of and also not being with your family and your friends that you're used to being in mourning with, or in also kind of for me, this text and this sound was almost like a therapeutic sort of space that I was tapping into, and so the whole project took on a different meaning. I sort of really embodied all these ideas in a very different way, a sort of kind of distant but virtual and digital sort of way. So I feel that was sort of different than, or let's say the project took a turn in that direction.
Well, I think it opened up a potential. I mean, we're looking at the project right now for those that are joining, and you can experience it in full, obviously, via our website. And I've taken out some of the text just to sort of hover there a bit more. But you talk about mutations in the text and the negative space, all of these concepts you're bringing in. And then I think there is this moment in the piece for me where it opens up the potentials of the idea of collective memory as well. So there is this, of course, sadness and desolation that is a part of collective mourning that we've all been experiencing. But in these memories and in this documentation, right, this text itself between Palestine and New York, you have a building of a collective memory. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak to that and its potential to break boundaries in different ways that we normally would conceive.
Yeah, I think that's very important and very, in a way, all our work has been trying to break down those boundaries and to say that Palestine is not so far from a lot of other conditions. And I always felt that when I used to say to people that actually, you know, we can trace a lot of similarities between what's happening in Palestine and what happens in America to, you know, people who are being sort of subjugated and oppressed. I always felt people really didn't get it, and they couldn't draw that line. And I think that the pandemic really drew the line in a sense. And then, of course, it coalesced with what, you know, it coalesced with the intensifying of, as you said, the uprising with the BLM movement and really wider than that. And I think that the connections and the resonances between different sites of struggle, you know, became much clearer in a way, and so the sort of spaces folded into each other. And so, yeah, I mean, it became really important for us that the experience here in New York, whether it was during the uprisings or generally the pandemic, it became important for us for that to be in, you know, in the script. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
I mean, I think, you know, I take it back to the sort of the performances that we created with artists in Ramallah.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of those were essentially, you know, they're new performances that we worked with on them, but they're essentially encryptions of what's there in the collection of that we collected online from Iraq, Syria, and Palestine. And so, in a way, what we tried to hear like, so those were encryptions of that material of a physical space that we couldn't get to, and then this sort of postscript was built also on these encryptions. So it was kind of like an encryption of an encryption that we then later, and I feel all these come out in the text and in the sound and in the image and how we try to bring it out in a sense, and it sort of connects to the sort of the feeling of a community under threat, or you know, becomes a sort of, yeah, I mean, it sort of resonates with the text and the feeling that we had in a way. So yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. I think it's actually a really good. Thank you for being so generous and sharing that, because I know the project. Many people will see that. This is actually some footage from the original performances mimicking the archive, correct? This is not probably what it will look like when it unfolds in summer 2021, but this is a preview in many ways. But maybe we can go back to that text, the slide earlier, Max, because before we open up to questions, because I know we're nearing the end and we started a bit late. This is again from that text, May Amnesia Never Kiss Us in the Mouth from 2015. And this is the end, this is the conclusion. And I thought it would, we could hold here, pause here, and think about these questions now. Mainly the end here, where it talks about the urgency of a moment demands a new imaginary. After all, what do artists as artists matter now? How has your view on that changed over the course of building Postscript? I mean, I can imagine how it might have changed, but your urgency as an artist, how has that changed for you? Or is it any different or just heightened?
I mean, the question always remains. Yeah. It's always a question for us that we keep returning to. And I think we have been living through incredibly difficult times where sometimes you're not sure why you're creating what you're creating. But I think, the need for, forms of testimony and forms of, turning towards, I feel that all our projects really turn towards what people are doing in these times, right? So how are people not only surviving, but generating different possibilities? And, really our projects draw from that, sort of like energy, even though many times it's this very fleeting thing, right? It's just a moment in which people, imagine a different possibility, lay claim or sort of, emancipate themselves, and it could just be a moment. But that moment is important. And so in a way, with May Amnesia, it's really about trying to hold on to those moments and then stay with them and think with them and be with them. And so in this case, the moments are these moments of song and dance that we're not showing any of it now, but it is really quite incredible. And then so that becomes the thing for us, like how to draw from that and how to hold on to those moments and just sort of amplify them, push them further. I don't know. So that's sort of for us how we try to matter through our practice, in a way, which is again, turning towards what people are doing to.
Yeah, I think before we always do a project, we always ask who cares. Like, that's an important question for us. Like when we, I feel something, but who else cares other than me, right? So to kind of move it beyond the sort of subject, like just me, and sort of more into a communal space where you're trying to express something that is, or not express, but question and push and propel things that not just you're concerned about, but people are concerned about, I think. So yeah.
Well, and the sound is such an important element to the Postscript as well as the text. I know we've given a lot of attention to the text itself, but I do think it's if for those that can experience it, I encourage you to do so even after this talk right now. A lot will be informed in doing so, but the sound itself is very important. Can we just maybe end by speaking to that and then maybe take a question? Well, actually, we only have 5 more minutes left. Maybe we should take a question if there are any, but while we're waiting for questions, perhaps you can speak to the importance of sound in the Postscript.
Yeah, I think as with all our works, the sort of sound is a sort of integral part of our practice in terms of I mean, in terms of this project, there was a lot of so the text is the integral part, I would say, in this work, and this and the sound kind of really follows the text and tries to. I mean, that's also the case with a lot of our work, but in this work, more so, I would say, because there was, I would say, I think sound in many ways allows you to take these sort of concrete ideas and concrete things that you're saying, and maybe kind of propel them more into an abstract and more sort of physical and immaterial realm. And then with here, it was almost like we were already in that realm, and we needed something that would take us more into like more clarity, and like the words were sort of very necessary to sort of maybe crystallize or clarify things a little bit. So I think it was very emotive, I would say, maybe, and very I'd say it was following the text a lot and really sort of not trying to put any boundaries or any sort of in terms of like, this is a better suiting sound to sort of what we're doing, or and it was very therapeutic. It has this very important element in that moment.
It is. Yeah.
But also we were working a lot with rhythm. No?
Absolutely.
It's a question we can answer. But we're working a lot more directly with like rhythm and, I would say, like music.
Absolutely.
Rather than
which is different than before, and that also takes its cue from the new performances that we created, and also the collection. So it kind of drew the moment into sort of what we've been thinking about.
And voice.
Obviously, there's a lot in voice being used.
We've been in conversation for almost every day, almost every week of the last 8 months or 9 months now, I guess, since you turned and pivoted really to giving full attention to the Postscript. And we're really thankful to have been working with you on this, and to be commissioning this with, of course, MoMA as well. And just it's been a long journey for you, 10 years, and I know how much the project means to you. And of course, the next part, which will launch, as we know, in mid 2021, most likely. But I think this is actually the perfect place to begin, and I appreciate the generosity in allowing us to pause and begin with this Postscript. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the support.
And thank you everyone that's listening for your patience earlier. There's nothing if not technical difficulties to start a talk. And if anybody does have any questions about the project or for Ruanne or Basel, you're always welcome to direct them to us. And just a reminder that if you'd like, you can watch 2 of the films. We're screening on our website. You just have to go on and look for the screening event, essentially, and you can view Only the Beloved Keeps Their Secrets. And remind me again the other film we're showing.
And Yet My Mask is part of it?
Yeah.
And Yet My Mask, that's correct, yes. Both fairly recent videos. So you can watch those through, I think, end of day Friday. And of course, you can experience the Postscript project as well via our website. Well, thank you both. I really appreciate it. More to come. And thank you everyone for joining. We appreciate your patience too.